So I'd like to start. Minister Getet, so are you ready?
Ready to do what? He's calling for you.
We want to hear the story about Rwanda, about investing in Rwanda, and I start with that, with the Honourable Minister, Dr. Mate Anthony, no, Mr. Clever Getet. Would you like to come up here?
Sure.
Thank you. It might be easier. I also want to mention to all of you that the conversation today is just not on the podium, but can be continued as the speakers finish their remarks as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thanks to the team at the high table, and dear colleagues. It's always puzzling when you are coming straight from the airport. You haven't reached your hotel, and then they tell you, go and speak about Rwanda. But I think this is a very good opportunity for us to interact and talk about Africa, because Rwanda cannot be talked about in isolation. And it's always good to see friends like Carlos from the ECA, who is here, who has been helping us in terms of developing our own economy. I just want to say a few words, and then I'll be very, very happy for the interactive discussion that we'll be having. The only thing I can say for Rwanda is I'm sure that most of you know the whole history about Rwanda, the tragic events that took place in 1994. And since that time, we have been trying to recover. And I'm just happy to say that since the time we started the MDGs, the 2000, up to now, our economy has been growing on average, I was counting, 8%. And that has been great. But for us, the economic growth alone is not enough. We've been also looking at the poverty reduction, which as 2 weeks ago, we saw the numbers that by the end of last year, at least our poverty levels have declined up to 39.1%, which is quite significant by any standards. And for the last 3 years alone, we have managed to reduce the extreme poverty from 24% to 16%. That's the highest that you could ever go. And our target is that by the year 2020, we should have no more poverty, extreme poverty. So we've been trying to really address the two tracks of development. What we are trying to see is really what the impact the economic growth have had, and that's why 2 weeks ago we are looking at the numbers in terms of the impact in health, in terms of education, in terms of reducing poverty, in housing, in all the other areas that matter for ordinary people. But at the same time, where we have been putting emphasis as Rwandans is really looking at the 4 pillars that we are focusing on: the economic transformation, the rural development, the productivity and youth employment, and also the accountable governance. Those 4 pillars that are really helping us in terms of achieving our vision of becoming a middle income country. And also the key focus here, we've been seeing that despite what has been happening in terms of the global shocks, right from the global financial crisis to the most recent when for the yuan depreciation, we are seeing that as we get more integrated, we also have to take into account the global challenges. And that's why we are looking at not only Rwanda in isolation, but Rwanda within the context of East Africa, and Rwanda within the context of African continent. And that's why most of our leaders have been saying infrastructure was very key, and we need to do more. But there are a few things that we need to do, which really sometimes do not require even investors or even resources. We've been doing an experiment, for example, in the East African community. If I take the example of the Northern Corridor from Rwanda to Uganda to Kenya, and we've been saying, why don't you have the infrastructure actually working for us? We've been working on the railway. We've been working on the electricity, so that we could harmonize even the grid of the electricity. And right now, we are even ready by the end of this year, because of the efforts of our heads of states of Kenya, Uganda, and Rwanda. We'll be importing from Kenya. We'll be importing electricity from Kenya, because we are now harmonizing on the 400 kilovolts. Initially, it was even different. We have also said, why don't we, first of all, allow the people to move around, to move within the region. And now you just use an ID card to move from Rwanda to Uganda to Kenya, and vice versa, by plane or by road. And this has helped really in terms of allowing the people to move. We have also said, why don't we remove the barriers that are really preventing goods from moving from one country to another. And that's why the heads of state, I remember it was a story that was initiated by our president when he put the people on the truck from Mombasa to Kigali and back. And it doesn't matter whether it is a bribe, whether it's a roadblock, whether it's a way bridge, and really they were taking, how many days are you taking? We found that from Mombasa to Kigali, you are taking 22 days. 22 days. And when they sat together and they say, we can do something, they say, let's remove all the roadblocks, let's remove all the way bridges, let's remove all the hurdles that are preventing goods from moving, let's make sure that you have one insurance rather than 3 insurances in the 3 countries. And now the time has reduced to now between 4 to 5 days in Rwanda from the 22 days. It's now taking less than that to reach Kampala, just because of the decisions, no other investments that were taken. The heads of state also decided to create the one area network within the region. That means you don't need roaming charges in our own region. And that has worked. The companies have benefited twice, and also ordinary people have benefited that. I'm just trying to show you the importance of that kind of integration. We are now doing the same for the Central Corridor with Tanzania and Burundi, so that we can now link up the whole region. By doing that, we are also encouraging all the goods to move freely from either Mombasa or from Dar es Salaam and linking to other countries, including the DRC. We have also linked the East African payment system. It means that the East Africans, the Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, and Rwanda, have now succeeded in linking their real-time gross settlements. That means they can transfer money and they can pay in the local currencies without necessarily having to change their money into the US dollars. That one is working. We are now working to see how we can link up the capital markets of the region so that you can do cross-border trading much easier and you can do cross-border settlements much easier. That's what you're working on. What I'm saying is that regional integration is very, very key for anybody to win, for anybody to succeed. Investing in Rwanda, I like it. We have the airport ready for grabs, which is coming up, a new airport that is the size of the Joburg, that is ready to go. We have energy. We have areas in so many other sectors. We need people to invest, but also you should come and invest, thinking of the bigger market within the Eastern Africa, within the East African community, but also in the whole Eastern Africa and the rest of the African continent. And that's how the investment would make more sense. In the case of Rwanda, we are moving fast. Time is not always on our side. And that's why we are saying that the longer you stay out of Rwanda, the longer you miss the opportunity to interlink with the Eastern and Central African states. We belong to the East African community. We belong to the Common Market for Eastern and Southern Africa. We belong to the Economic Community for Central African states. We also belong to the Economic Community for the Great Lakes region. So once you're in Rwanda, you take advantage of us being a member of all those kind of regions so that you can do business within the entire region. So I encourage everyone here to take advantage and come to Rwanda, establish your headquarters, and be able to link with the rest of the Eastern and Southern Africa, but also the Great Lakes region of about 21 countries. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir, for your very clear remarks and about the investment opportunities in Rwanda. By the way, the minister was in UNDP from 1997 to 2000 as the national economist for Rwanda, actually. So you're on secondment now to the Rwandese government from the UN. I'd like to invite Dr. Ibrahim Mayaki, who's the Chief Executive Officer of NEPAD, which is the New Partnership for Africa's Development. The agency set up specifically, set up by the African Union to address the opportunities and, in fact, infrastructure challenges in the whole of Africa. So his organization serves as the gateway for investing in Africa, if you like. NEPAD is the only organization which is a direct partner within the UN, which earlier today you saw Ambassador Maged Abdulaziz, who's the Undersecretary General for Africa. and their only mission is supporting the NEPAD agency. So Dr. Mackey, you've just come from chairing a major meeting at the United Nations, and we'd love you to share your thoughts in terms of what people might be able to do to invest in Africa through your organization. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here and have this interaction. I will go through 4 quick points. The first one is about, PIDA, our strategic framework for infrastructure development on the continent, which was built bottom-up on the basis of the master plans of regional economic communities. The big change provided by PIDA was to reach a political and technical consensus on key regional infrastructure projects. So today, from West Africa to East Africa to Southern Africa, the countries composing these regions, within these regional economic communities, have commonly identified regional priority projects. And the big challenge in implementing regional cross-border projects is not really technical, is fundamentally political. And my dear brother, Minister from Rwanda, was highlighting how political determination, I'm speaking like Carlos, how political determination helped and is helping EAC move as what I consider as CEO of NEPAD, the most integrated region in the continent. It's about political determination, fundamentally. The second issue about PIDA is that we held a conference on financing infrastructure last year in Dakar. The main conclusion of the conference was not the lack of financial resources to fund the projects, it was the lack of bankable projects. And talking about bankable projects and building on that conclusion, we did create with the African Union Commission and the regional economic communities what we call the service delivery mechanism, which is an early stage project preparation facility which can pick out of a pipeline of PIDA projects that will go through pre-feasibility and feasibility studies and present bankability characteristics in order to liaise with the private sector. Now, in that liaison with the private sector, with our partners and African investors, we did build what we call the Continental Business Network for one single reason. And that reason was related to the necessity to create a cultural change. What happens very frequently is that public sector officials do not have a private sector culture, and private sector operators hardly know how the public sector is working. So if you do not have a space that allows an interaction between private sector operators and public sector officials on how to solve the key bottlenecks related to infrastructure development, then you miss enormously in terms of implementation, and you go on in rhetoric, and a blaming type of process. So the Continental Business Network is a gathering of key operators from within the continent and outside of the continent that can have a direct discussion not only on projects, but on key issues like non-tariff barriers, which there also need a political implication. What does that mean in terms of cultural change, behavioral change, organizational dynamics? It means that implementation frequently is pinpointed, targeted as a technical dimension. Implementation within the African context is not technical only, it is fundamentally political, supported by a technical dimension. And this is why wherever our heads of states and government put their feet into the implementation process with political determination, things move faster. So the monopoly of implementation, which was in the hands of experts advising political leaders, is ceasing now. And when you hear President Museveni talking about electricity very technically, it means that he plays a role in the implementation process, and this is a change that is taking place, and we see it also with President Kagame and other presidents. So this key change is extremely important in my view. Now, on the issue of the financial dimension, Carlos Lopez was reminding us this morning that we need to do our homework in mobilizing domestic resources. And he was giving one simple example. You increase by 1% the fiscal pressure. In Africa, fiscal pressure is the lowest in the world. We increase by 1%, it gives us $60 billion. And if you look at the funding gap of PIDA, which is about $45 billion, well, you have really a potential solution which can trigger effectively the implementation of our infrastructure projects. Lastly, I would like to say a few words for our partners here about the delivery process of a regional integration agenda. The optimality of the solutions to Africa's development is at regional level, not at national level. Whether it is about energy, about transport, about agriculture. Our solutions are at regional level. And in order to optimize that, the delivery process has 3 steps. The first step is the design of a continental strategy, PIDA, CADEP, etc. The second step is the regional translation of that continental strategy. So EAC, ECOWAS, SADC have regionally translated the PIDAs, the CADEPs, and the other frameworks. And the last step is the coherence between national plans and regionally translated strategies that have been designed at continental level. This is the coherent setting of the delivery of a regional integration agenda, and we are moving towards that. And it has been extremely well understood within the African Union, and our role institutionally as NEPAD is to make sure that we facilitate that implementation at regional and national level. The role of the African Development Bank is to boost their financial muscles so that they help the governments move towards that regional integration. And we have in the Economic Commission for Africa our think tank which leads us in how to think about structural transformation. Lastly, beyond the rhetoric, we have 16 very concrete projects that are bankable, from transport to energy to IT, etc. These have been determined with a working group of the World Economic Forum, and we have filtered with critical criteria how they can be bankable and how they can be implemented. They are at the disposals of the private sector partners, and we disseminate the necessary information on these 16 projects, and they are ready to be implemented. Thank you.
Dr. Mayaki, thank you very much for sharing with us in terms of the opportunities. I hope you'll be around after the high-level segment is over, so that you might be able to meet with some of the people who are interested in doing something directly via NEPAD. I'm so pleased also to see that Mr. Asamoah, who's the Vice President of the African Development Bank, is here with us. Before I invite him to speak, you'll see my bias. I'd like to invite my very good friend, who is the Executive Secretary of the Economic Commission for Africa. He's an accomplished diplomat, highly respected in the international community. He was director of the UN Staff College. He advised Secretary General Kofi Annan for a number of years in the startup of his term. He was also the Executive Director for the United Nations Institute for Training and Research. He has served in the field. He was the resident coordinator in one of the largest, in fact, the largest operations globally, which is in Brazil, where I had the privilege and honor to participate in an exciting conference, the first time ever when the idea of public-private partnerships was discussed, way back about 12, 15 years ago, actually. Carlos, I'm so pleased you're here, and I know you participated in the NEPAD meeting this morning, and you hosted the FFD event in July, and we'll be back with you for the AU Summit in January. So we want to invite you to share your thoughts about the African leadership story. Welcome.
Thank you, Amir, and with my apologies to Salomon. Because of the complicated agenda today, I will have to leave, so this is very nice of you to accommodate me to make just a few comments. And I'm very happy that I'm doing it in a panel with Mayaki and Gatete, two brothers and two people with whom I work very closely, together with Salomon. Well, by now, I think this kind of public knows the Africa story from one perspective, which is about growth, opportunities. The problem with that story is that it's a very partial story. It's a story that camouflages three problems that we are also more or less familiar, but we have a bit more difficulty in putting in graphic terms to those who are not very knowledgeable about the continent. The issue of agricultural productivity being so low, the fact that manufacturing value addition is going down instead of up in the middle of this growth story, and the fact that our services boom is characterized immensely by an informal sector that is exploding and therefore not generating what the ILO defines as decent jobs. So it's about unemployment and to a large extent activities that are more linked to resilience, but not necessarily to economic transformation. So our agenda is about economic transformation. And economic transformation is more than just changing the GDP composition, which is part of it. It's also taking advantage of a number of opportunities from our perspective, very different from just the opportunities for the investors. And I think it's important to start from that vantage point to then make the case for investment, which I will. We all know the fact that Africa does not benefit much from value addition of its natural resources. We have a very lively extractive sector that has been more or less associated with the richness of the continent. It generates just about 1% of Africa's employment, formal employment, so it's nothing, despite the fact that it contributes close to 80% of our exports, although it's not really the number one responsible part of our growth story, which is mostly characterized by internal demand. But still, most of the investments until quite recently were going into this, extractive industries. And now we are seeing a shift, and this shift is very much welcome because it is part of this transformation that I was talking about. And that shift is actually increasing the rate of return of investment in Africa, which is now the highest, 9.4% compared to the average of 7.2%. And therefore, you know, in principle, with such a nice line, we shouldn't need to sell Africa too much. People should be coming to us because there is so much excess of capital right now in the market. So this is a unique opportunity to make bucks. But of course, as you know, there is the association with risk that really Africans have a great deal of difficulty getting rid of because of the narrative being what it is. And I don't have time to go into the details of the narrative, but basically if you look into the future and the opportunities that the future offers, you look into the megatrends, the demographic megatrend, the technological megatrend, and of course the environmental megatrend, Africa is very much poised to be a solution for a number of problems that we are seeing today. And I'm not exaggerating when I say it, because in terms of natural resources, not just the extractives will still count, but that's not the main opportunity in Africa. It's more the fact that we have arable land that is going to be scarce, is the fact that we are going to be able to take advantage of renewable energy now having a cost of production similar to fossil fuels, which means that we can go straight into leapfrogging into green industrialization. And the fact that we have such low productivity in agriculture is actually an opportunity, because it shows that with very marginal, residual, sometimes efforts, you can really catapult Africa into a very different league. And all of this depends on infrastructure. So the investments on infrastructure are key. And I think the African Development Bank has put its finger into it. Of course, we had the continental agenda for it defined by NEPAD through PIDA, the Program for Infrastructure Development in Africa. And once we fix that one big problem, we still have 3 other very big problems to fix. Second one is the issue of how we are going to increase capital access. Domestic resource mobilization is the door. We have to mobilize much more internal African resources. I don't have time to elaborate, but this morning I did it in another panel. Huge opportunities there. I calculate with my colleagues that we have about $1 trillion of opportunities in the continent that can be tapped into. We just need the right mechanisms. And of course, we have to discuss that rather than discuss aid. Aid, as much as I like it, it's $52 billion. It's not much compared to the needs of the continent, and not much compared to the 1 trillion that we need to mobilize. And that is where we should put our emphasis. And we have also another very important difficulty, which is the difficulty of how we are going to prepare our youth to take advantage of these opportunities. And of course, this includes human capital investments that are extremely important. And I think we are going to just take the demographic dividend rhetoric to one step higher and make sure that this political determination that has been mentioned several times finds its way also in the way we deal with education and equipping our youth to respond to the calls for industrialization. And that, of course, is going to allow us to finally do what other regions have already done. You know, if you look into the history of industrial development in the world, it's very simple. Colonies do not industrialize, okay? Colonies do not industrialize. They take time to industrialize because This was a preserve that you have to conquer. You have to go through the stairs. And as you become independent, you can make it if you are capable of actually putting in place the right setups. Africans have been the latest to be decolonized, and even further have been the latest to actually walk those stairs. And as a result, they are real latecomers when it comes to industrialization. So much so that some people have even doubts that we can do it still today. Well, if you look into the labor costs in Asia, particularly in China, that's an opportunity for Africa, because the low-end value industrial production of those regions will have to migrate, and we offer a very good bet for that migration. If you look into the potential that we have for green industrialization, I mentioned it, that's another opportunity. If you look into the African market that is growing not just in terms of middle class, but overall demographics, is going to be about 2 billion people before 2050, and we are going to be the largest workforce by 2040. There you go. You know, these are very powerful incentives if Africans do the right things. And doing the right things is basically about setting the agenda right and convincing investors like you that really is not just about return on investment being so good. It is the best. It's also about us being able of convincing you through our narrative that the risk is worth taking. Thank you.
Carlos, thank you. Thank you so much, Carlos. You know, when you hear all of the opportunities out there, it also raises the question of how can you sift through all of this and say, I want to invest in either infrastructure or service industries, and then drill down into the service industries and so on. And I will maybe talk to my good friend Hubert to see how we might create a kind of a online portal where we can capture some of these things. And we at the Global Partnerships Forum have been thinking about creating some kind of a platform where it'll make it easier just to put stuff on the platform and say, I can pick and choose what kind of investments. And talking about investments, and I'm so pleased, Carlos, you raised the point of come and invest in Africa. The African Development Bank focuses on that issue, provides a lot of critical infrastructure financing, and in fact, almost like startup financing as well on occasion. So we are delighted to have Mr. Asamoah here. Thank you for your patience. It's good to have you back. So welcome back. Please, I know you'll speak from there, so please do. Thank you. Yep, I can hear it.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Is it on?
Yep.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. And I actually think that Mr. Lopez is one of my favorite speakers, so I'm very happy to allow him to speak first. He makes my life easier because he's always articulate and gets to the point. My name is Solomon Asamoah. I'm the Vice President at the Africa Development Bank, responsible for infrastructure, private sector, and regional integration. My job here today is to talk a little bit about the bank's commitments to the MDGs, but also to talk about how the bank is itself transforming and moving forward as an institution to partner to try and promote and implement and execute Africa's development. I think in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals, I mean, the bank has been obviously very much involved in that as a development finance institution. Over $30 billion of financing directly over the last 15 years. And we support the agenda, we support the items, and we really want to continue that support both in terms of financing, policy, advocacy, support, etc. What I wanted to spend a few of my time speaking about, and I know we're running late of time, so I'll be quite brief. We've recently elected a new president of the African Development Bank, and he has really highlighted 5 new agenda items for the bank. And I think it's worthwhile just going through those and talking a little bit about those because they really capture the essence of the issues and what we're trying to do to move them forward. So it comes into five categories. Light Up Africa, or Power Africa, feed itself, integrate Africa, industrialize Africa, and improve the quality of life for people on the ground. So I'll talk a little bit about each of those and their importance and how we propose to try and make a difference. On the first priority, he's made this his #1 priority, which is really power and light up Africa. And I think this is critical on a number of ways. Firstly, it's very, very hard, as I always say, to develop in the dark. So if the continent is going to develop, it needs the energy and the light. And the power also allows us to do all the other things that we want to try and do. Access to affordable and reliable energy sources really is the bedrock or the foundation through which we can move forward. So the president announced what he called the New Deal on energy. And this is really 2 very high strategic goals that we're aiming for. First is to have 80% access by 2025, and then to have full access by 2030. And when he announced those aims, a lot of people looked at him saying, he's a naive new president, he'll calm down in a while. And then he made a very interesting statement, I thought. He said 2 things. First of all, he said to me, he said, the Africa Development Bank was not established to do small things. And secondly, he said, we've collectively allowed ourselves to get into the rut where we actually believe lighting up our continent is not achievable. And it's just not true. It's actually very achievable. And so with those focus, we're approaching the energy and the power sector quite differently. We had a high-level conference last week in Abidjan, where at relatively short notice of less than 2 weeks, we invited many, many people around the globe to come to us and just have a frank discussion about the power situation in the African continent. Over 150 people came, high-level people, which really was a testament, not so much to the African Development Bank, but to me it was a testament to the importance and the willingness to be part of the solution that exists around the globe to solve Africa's power crisis. So what we're going to do is the African Development Bank, and we made it very clear that there are many, many different initiatives. There are many people working on the power sector across Africa. We're not going to even attempt to try and replicate that. But what we're going to do is to try and work with as many partners as we can to coordinate so that our effort is more concrete and is more sustainable. Each individual institution or people, and there are probably many of you here in the audience who have worked on the power sector in Africa, have come across a roadblock or 1 or 2 roadblocks. You've been trying to push and you hit something and you can't move it. Well, maybe 2 or 3 other different people have that particular solution, and maybe you have the solution for somebody else. So I think we have to coordinate, pull our resources together. The unique role that the African Development Bank has, as all of our countries in Africa are shareholders of the African Development Bank, we do have an access and ability to talk to our governments and to support our governments, those that want to do the right thing, with practical advice as well as resources. So we want to play that coordinating role because really, as I said, you can't really develop as Africa if we don't have access to power. Second thing on the feed itself agenda for the African Development Bank, and I won't have to repeat many of the statistics and the points just made by Mr. Lopez and other people, the importance of agriculture sector to Africa. And again, anybody who looks at it, looks at the sector, knows that most of our, or a large proportion of our produce gets wasted during harvest times. There's very little technology involved in the sector. And to the extent that Africa is now a net importer of food, which is quite scandalous if you think about it. So again, we have to make a new approach. We have to introduce the uses of technology. We have to introduce better uses of irrigation. We also have to, and this is the bedrock, which is the infrastructure and our ports development, and then use the issues of power to be able to power all of these things. The idea, I was actually at a panel during Obama's trip to Kenya. I was with the ambassador on the same panel. And one of the things that we recognize in the agriculture sector is that if we can make agriculture sexy for young people to want to get involved in it, then we're probably 80% of the way there. If we can get young people from the cities, all coming out of university, saying to themselves, I want to develop a career in agriculture, then it means that we probably would have cracked something. So I don't think young people are very interested in using basic tools to go and dig ground. So we have to use technology, we have to use advance. And I think that's an area that we're going to make a major push with our partners as well. The integration of Africa, integrate Africa, I think many speakers just spoke to that, so I don't need to repeat it. But the importance of having larger markets to be able to attract financing, the importance of having the freer movements of goods and people, and the importance of having greater cross-border investments between African countries as opposed to just relying on external financing are going to really move things forward. So what we have to do, we have to look at the barriers that are preventing regional integration and economic activity. I have two pictures which I sometimes show. The first picture is of a dilapidated road with potholes, and there's a big lorry and it's fallen over because it's got trapped in a pothole. This is obviously a problem, and it's an infrastructure problem. Then I show a second slide, which is of this great 5-lane motorway, perfect surface for miles, with no traffic on it, perfect road. And then you see along the side a line of lorries going back a mile, all trapped at the border. That's not an infrastructure problem, but that is what's preventing a lot of regional integration to be done efficiently. So we have to look at those barriers to integration as well. The policy environment, the regulatory environment, the corruption, all of those issues which also prevent regional integration from happening. Fourth, on the industrialization, I don't need to say anything, Carlos Lopez said it. Very, very few regions, if any, have developed without industrializing. And we have actually the ingredients now for Africa to make a major push over the next few decades. The demographics of Africa are right. I heard an interesting statement the other day. I don't know if it's true, so don't quote me, but I think it captures the point. By 2060, 50% of all young people in the world will be in Africa. So if you're a global business looking for a global strategy, does it make sense not to be part of that and have a strategy for Africa? So I think the opportunities and the young people for Africa to take advantage, once we have the stable power, once we have produced some of the basic infrastructure to industrialize and manufacture, has never been greater. And that's an area that we need to focus on. And then finally, on the quality of life issue, I mean, there's only one thing I need to say about that. I think we all have to work towards eliminating this shameful thing that we see, which is a bit of an indictment on all of the continent, of these people risking everything across the Sahara, across the Mediterranean, to do anything they can to get out of Africa. I think it's an indictment that we haven't created the environment at home. So we're going to make a major push on that particular area as well, youth jobs, and making sure that we actually create the environment at home that attracts people. So bottom line, no single institution can solve all of these problems, but collectively we can make a huge difference. And the other thing that's realized now, and it's not just a talking point anymore, it's reality. The governments have realized that they cannot do it without the private sector. So they're busy putting conditions to be able to leverage financing for the private sector. So all of these problems that we have is actually an investment opportunity on the continent. You can actually make good returns and make a difference. And we're happy to work with anybody interested to do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Solomon. Really appreciate what you've said. Solomon, so if people want to see what kind of projects you're working and supporting, can they get that from your website?
Yep, afdb.org.
Very good. Thank you. That's very helpful. I talked early on about kind of an online resource. So it's premature, but I just want to give you a URL. You might want to look at it maybe in another week's time. It's called sdgsonline.org, sdgsonline.org. We're putting out a prototype. It's purely a prototype at this point. The idea is to capture projects from around the world. Barbara says to me that I must ask 10 questions from people, but I hope you'll forgive me if I don't ask any questions, because the next round of speakers, and Hubert is pulling his hair out whatever there is, sir. Yeah, Hubert, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here with you. Thank you. It's a privilege to partner with the Africa Investor and the team. And I want to thank our distinguished panelists here for sharing their ideas, and we look forward to having you back again. So, thank you very much indeed.
Doing business in Africa, you can't afford to be without Africa Investor.